Welcome to the AIA Minneapolis Women in Architecture Committee. My name is Katie Kangas, and I am the founder of Pask Architecture and a storyteller for the Flying Solo podcast. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of the Women in Architecture Committee here in Minnesota. In honor of a decade of engagement, I am interviewing the past 10 co-chairs of this committee. Please sit back and enjoy as we reflect on where the profession of architecture has been in the past 10 years. We talk about how things are going and look forward to the future that awaits women practicing in architecture.
Amy, you were there at the start, so we are so glad to have you. Welcome. Can you tell us where you're practicing and what you're doing now?
I am currently a senior project manager doing healthcare architecture. That's my jam right now. And then I'm also the president of AIA Minnesota, which has been amazing and wonderful and full of unexpected twists and turns.
Understandable. And you are good at handling those twists and turns. When you have a day off, what do you do?
Oh, these days, honestly, just chill out. I just veg and sleep. Young in my career, I did not sleep a lot, especially when you have little kids. Sleep was not something that you had time for. But now that my kids are a little bit older, I definitely prioritize sleep. And then I read. I love reading. Usually I run. I've been sidelined with a bit of an injury and I haven't gotten back. And then just family stuff, right? I love hanging out with the family, doing stuff. I've taken up paddleboarding. And so that is a very, very fun activity for me. That's probably one of my favorite activities. And then my husband and I see a ton of live music. I'm going to a show tonight.
Nice. It's amazing that you are the current president of AIA Minnesota. How did you first get started with AIA and volunteering?
So I actually, when I got licensed, I didn't join the AIA because it wasn't paid for by my firm at the time. And I didn't know what the value it brought me. I did join about 2 years after I got licensed and, I needed my CEUs and so I started going to the conference and I found that a great place to network. But how I really got involved with AIA was when I needed AIA. And I started the Women in Architecture Committee with 2 other women. And so it came out of a place of extreme pain and hurt. I'm not going to lie. I was really struggling to be a full-time working architect and a full-time working mom. And at the time, my husband was also working full-time and going to law school at night. And it wasn't working for me. I was really struggling. I felt like a horrible parent and spouse, and I felt like a horrible architect. I felt like I was constantly letting my team down by having to go home. And I always had to pick the kids up because my husband would go to law school at night. So I would always have to leave by a certain time to get them. And my hands were tied. I had to do that. So when they stayed late and ordered dinner in and worked on a deadline, I couldn't participate. And I just thought, I can't be the only one struggling with this. So I reached out to Maureen Colburn, who I knew had just had a baby. Her daughter is about 6 months older than mine. And we started talking about it and we thought, we can't be alone. This isn't just us. And so we started reaching out to a bunch of, at first it was moms. And then when word got out, it quickly became evident that this wasn't a mom issue. This was a women's issue that we were dealing with and the challenges that we were facing as women. It wasn't unique to mothers. And so that's how it started. That was really how I started to get involved, was by the 3 of us coming together, Maureen Colburn, Amanda Aspenson, and myself, to form the Women in Architecture Committee.
That is an incredible story, and it's led to an amazing legacy. Can I just ask, how did you even find each other? Before there was the committee, most women are their heads are down, working hard. How do you even find each other? You're so busy.
Yeah, that's, my husband worked with Maureen. And so we had connected because Maureen, right after her daughter was born, we connected at like the office party or something like that. And she was like, how are you handling like X, Y, and Z? And we just started chatting. And then we quickly reached out to Renee Chang at the U of M. And Renee gave us a list of people that were that she knew from the U of M, and Amanda was on that list. And the three of us just kind of clicked. And then we started a book club. And the first book that we read was Lean In. And we just put it out on Facebook just to see, like, let's see how wide of a net we could cast. And this was 2014. And we actually, the first meeting probably had like 15 or 16 people. And that was how it really all got started.
That's amazing. And it's so fun to see how it's continued to grow. Looking back at 10 years ago, what were some of the initial ideas that helped start this committee and set it on its current path?
One of the things that we most wanted was to be a resource for each other, our own network group. And one of the things that we had a different executive director then, and she said, this will not be a book club. This is going to be a professional network. And we understood that. And so we really wanted it to be skills-based, really building a network of people so that we could use each other as a network. And then also we were ready to really shine a light on some of the biggest challenges that women were facing at the time.
And so you actually went further into that and you dove into the numbers back then. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the presentation that we developed was called Establishing the Business Case for Women in Architecture. And one of the things that I quickly learned was that men in leadership didn't want to hear my sob story. They didn't want to hear they're like, yeah, we get it. I'm a parent too. And or I would hear a lot like, I have daughters too. And so I really wanted to focus it on the financials. Like, there is a business case, there is a financial reason why it is important to have women at the table. And at the time, it was very focused on gender. And obviously we still are, but there wasn't as much talk about race then. It was sort of acknowledged, but we knew we were leaning into gender. And so I needed statistics, I needed facts to rely on, and I also needed to demonstrate that there is a financial advantage to having women at the leadership table. And also, we were constantly fighting bias. That was the other thing. How do you address that? I still don't have that answer. Bias is huge, other than to raise awareness. And that's always the first step.
Where were we at 10 years ago?
So 10 years ago, there were 40% of architectural graduates with an undergraduate degree or a master's degree were women. So 41%, which is an important statistic because now, 10 years later, we're at 53%. So that is an enormous growth over the last 10 years. And then the number of people registering with NCARB, same thing, a big leap. In 2014, we were at 39% women, and now we're at 50%. So those are great leaps forward. Associate AIA, 10 years ago, we were at 30%, and now we're at 41%.
Okay.
And so a common number here is we've seen about 11% growth of women participating up to this point, up to Associate AIA. So school, registering with NCARB, Associate AIA, we see about 11%. This is where it starts to dwindle. In 2014, in the profession, we were at 24%. So in the profession is the Bureau of Labor Statistics number. So it may include women who are licensed or not licensed. It's just if you're practicing in architecture. And since it's a Bureau of Labor Statistics number, it includes both of those things. So we were at 24% then. and we're at 32% now. And so a little bit less growth.
Dropping down to 8% growth. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. And then in AIA, again, a little tick down in 2000. So AIA members, so this you have to be licensed, it's not associate AIA. In 2014, we were at 18%, and now we're at 25%. So 7% growth there. And then the last stat that I tend to have is principals and partners. In 2014, there was an article published in a reputable magazine, and I don't recall which one, but it was said that 17% of principals and partners were women. And I've never been able to find another stat to compare that to ever since. For many, many, many years, I think that a lot of other publications are referencing that same article and using 17%. And then that also begs the question is, how do you define leadership? Because as we've looked at who is in leadership, a lot of times somebody like the chief marketing officer, who's oftentimes a woman, is counted in leadership. Well, yes, that's a woman in leadership. Is she an architectural leader? And so, and in some cases, yes, because that might be a great mentor for a young woman. But she's not an architect. So when I think of leadership, I personally am often looking for somebody who is an architect in leadership. But firms will often say, oh, we've got 50% women in leadership, and they've got interior designers included in that mix. Those finance, marketing, HR professionals, legal is often included in that. And that really is what makes up the bulk of the women, not the architects. And so it depends on how you define leadership and what you're looking for.
So how are these facts received, both by the Women in Architecture Committee that was just starting 10 years ago, and by, you presented these at the conference to people to explain this business case for women in architecture?
Yeah, it was received really, really well. And people were interested. I used to meet regularly with the heads of different firms who were just curious. They were like, what do we need to be doing differently? And that's not true of every firm. There was a few. And then the firm that I was at the time was very interested in like, okay, how do we move the mark? And so one of the things that we developed was like, okay, what can you be doing? And the biggest thing at that time that I was saying was know your numbers. That's just raise awareness. Just know your numbers. What percentage of women do you have in leadership? And what percentage do you have in the pipeline? And look at it and see year over year, are you making progress? And then, we would always, there was a big list of things that firms could be doing and also individuals could be doing. As an individual, one thing that I am comfortable doing because I'm an extreme extrovert, which everybody knows about me. I'll call it when I see it. Like if there's a meeting and a woman raises an idea and it kind of gets glazed over, and then 15 minutes later, a man brings up the same idea, and somebody latches on and goes, "Oh yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more." And I will not hesitate to say, "Oh wait, isn't that what Shannon just said? Shannon, can you tell us more about what you were thinking?" Like I don't hesitate to do that kind of thing. It's not uncommon that I still get asked to get coffee for people or, these things, or I walk into a room and people assume that I'm the interior designer or an admin assistant. These things still happen. And just being able to gracefully correct them. Oh, I'm actually the medical planner for this project, not the interior designer. That person will be here at the next meeting. Oh, you wanted a cup of coffee? Great. It's down the hall and to the left. Help yourself. Things like that, like whatever you can do.
So how have you seen the Women in Architecture Committee kind of help with that gap and strengthen women in the profession?
For me, it's been the network that I've built over the last 10 years. that has helped me. I am a chronic job changer. I change jobs all the time. I've gone through a lot of firms. And having the Women in Architecture network has really helped me a lot. More often than not, it's somebody in the Women in Architecture community that I'm reaching out to say, hey, how are things at your firm? Or, things along those lines. So it's really been the network, both for me and people reach out to me. People have reached out to me that are moving to Minnesota and they're like, hey, I'm moving and I don't know any of the firms. Is there any way that I can get tours or anything? And I can help with that. And so a lot of times, again, it's calling on that network and making connections either for myself or for other people. And that feels the best is when I can connect another woman to another woman who's facing a similar issue, or just to introduce them to a firm, or to get the inside scoop on X, Y, or Z. I'm always grateful to be able to make those connections. But also, I've learned so much through the committee, through the different events that we've had. I'll never forget when we did the Strengths Finders training. Who walks in having just had a baby like 2 or 3 weeks prior, but Katie Kangas with her newborn. And we all just got to hold that baby and rock that baby while we all did our strengths training. And that strengths training actually is something that I leverage to this very day. Communication is my number one skill, always has been. I've taken the test multiple times and things change around a little, except that one thing for me. And so I've learned a lot through that. And I also learned through, one of the books that we read. I didn't even realize this, like women have to stop apologizing. I'm terrible at it. And I've taught my daughter the exact same thing. My daughter does it. And my son didn't seem to pick it up. I don't know why. But it's really interesting. And it's a really hard habit to break. It's super hard.
It is really hard. Yeah. And I remember that I also leveraged that Strength Finders event so much. And part of the reason I felt able to go was that I was on maternity leave and I didn't have to explain it to my office. And so it's like, yeah, I'm more available right now than trying to explain to my office. I need to take a break from the day and go do this personal development thing for a few hours during a work day, which is another conversation. About giving yourself space for that personal development, which I think Women in Architecture, the committee hosts these events, they bring that professional standard, and then it is something you can log off from work from because it's official. We're out in the open having these conversations and growing professional development. I wanted to touch on one little thing. Do you have a nugget of advice about making connections? Because you've talked a lot about that. What does it mean to connect with someone? How do you do it versus a simple like, oh, I met someone and said hi. When do you call them a connection and someone you can lean on? This is networking 101, but I think it could be really useful.
Yeah. So for me, it's just finding common ground with somebody. And that can be hard. Like we've got the peer-to-peer mentoring and I've done that a few times, and a couple of times it's been great and I've connected with the person, and sometimes I haven't. And so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's about finding that common ground. I talk so much and I forget to listen. And so I work really hard at that. And so I think that the piece of advice that I would give is to just be really inquisitive and be open to sharing where you're at personally. Because the strongest connections that I've made have been when I've been vulnerable and said, I'm just really struggling with something. And I've said it, and then people come out of the woodwork. Like if I were to say it like at a meeting, people will come up afterwards if they're not comfortable saying something in the meeting. They're like, hey, me too. I have felt that as somebody who thrives on connection. I don't get that as much as I used to. I miss it a lot. And so trying to find the right balance of that. But I can't even begin to say how the impact how the pandemic impacted women in our profession. I think that it helped in a lot of areas, but I think it also hurt us in a lot of areas too.
And so where do you see the Women in Architecture Committee being, filling that gap, filling the gap of the needs right now? Because we are in that post-pandemic, there's firms trying to frantically grasp back at people to bring them back in the office. There's others that have embraced this flexible work environment, but I think they're all trying to struggle with this culture, and we as a committee have switched to virtual. Most AIA committees have switched to virtual. And so as leader of AIA, where are we shaping culture?
AIA, we have shifted almost all meetings to virtual. And what we are actively talking about is, do we have a quarterly in-person check-in, or once or twice a year connection? We all tend to connect at the conference, and if you're on one of the AIA boards, there is a board retreat that is in person every year. And for the committees, I'm seeing more and more committees that really want to meet in person. I just went to a government affairs committee meeting that was in person, which was great. But it was in person around a table. There was no video connection. So if you needed to be remote that day, you couldn't. So that, there's pluses and minuses, right? The Women in Architecture Committee, one of the things that has heartened me the most is, so often with these committees that aren't required, we're required to have the finance committee. We're required to have the government affairs committee for good reason, for the business of AIA. But there are committees out there, that we aren't required to have. I don't think we're required to have the committee on the environment, but it makes a lot of sense. Or right now there is a healthcare knowledge community. And that committee, it's not a committee, it's a knowledge community. It's floundering. They aren't getting great participation. And so 10 years ago, when I, had this harebrained idea to start the Women in Architecture Committee, one of my greatest fears was that once I let go, I was really afraid that without my momentum, that it might stall out. But the thing that I am the most proud of is that it is the most robust committee that I know of today. And I have stepped away. I don't go to that many Women in Architecture meetings because I have to go to so many other committee meetings. And it's, through the pandemic, I kind of lost touch with AIA a little bit. I needed to step back because my father passed away during the pandemic from cancer, not from COVID. But it still was a big loss for me, and I just needed to step back. And when I spent my president-elect year trying to go to at least one meeting of every committee. And the most participants that I ever saw was Women in Architecture. We are still just a really robust committee, and that demonstrates a lot to me. There's a great need. I really wish we had an LGBTQ committee. I don't know why we don't. And then we have NOMA for race, and I am a NOMA member, and I do go to their happy hours and some of their meetings and stuff. And so there's this need there still, and the fact that it's carried on, like, I bring a lot of passion and momentum to things, and I always fear like if I step away, that momentum is going to be lost, but it absolutely wasn't. I think it just was amplified. And that just demonstrates there were so many more women out there that are ready to lead that maybe weren't given the opportunity. And leadership within AIA was a great path for them.
It is super encouraging. And I think that's been really energizing with all of these interviews, is to talk to each of the former co-chairs about what is the secret sauce, what is helping this be sustained. And I don't know if we've touched on what's at the core of it, but there's something that we don't have a word for that's holding this community together and keeping this growing in the future. About that, what do you hope the future holds? We're in 2024 right now. What do you hope to happen by 2034?
I hope we keep moving the mark. One of the things that happened at many of the large firms, not all, but many, is they hired an equity and diversity consultant to bring to come into their firms and do some training. That helped. I think that it gave us all a common language and understanding. And in some cases, most people, I think, used Heather Hackman, who I can't say enough wonderful things about. And she has two different trainings. One is gender-based and one is race-based. And the reason is that gender bias and race bias are rooted in two very different things. They're both cultural biases, but they are very, very different roots and what they're stemming from. And so they really do need to be tackled separately. There's certainly overlap, though. And so I think that was a big push and something that made a big difference. And so, the murder of George Floyd was another big amplifier where people were ready to double down on race diversity and racial equity. And my hope is that momentum isn't lost. George Floyd was murdered at the start of the pandemic. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to move this mark, not lose momentum when it comes to, I'm just going to broadly say, social justice, which that's a huge umbrella. I think that one of the things is, we started out focused on gender equity, but the umbrella has grown so much to social justice, I would say. And I think that's very appropriate. But I really hope, we're graduating over 50% women in our profession in 10 years. I really hope we have over 50% women in AIA. And I'm really curious about what happens in leadership, because anecdotally, I've seen several women raised up into leadership positions only to fall from grace. And it's anecdotal. Women that have been asked to step down from their leadership positions, who have chosen to step down from their leadership positions, but they aren't there anymore. And I don't know how to navigate that. I don't know why it's happening. I don't know why some women can't even break that glass ceiling. I had a good friend tell me, Amy, I feel like the glass ceiling is being rebuilt. And I think that is a sentiment that is shared amongst many women. I feel that way a little bit. I don't necessarily feel like the glass ceiling is being rebuilt in our culture. I think it is in our profession. I think people were willing to try it, give women these opportunities, and they didn't like the way that it was going because it wasn't their way. It wasn't the way we've always done it. Because women do things differently, and that's a good thing. So my hope for 2034 is that this committee is still going, because there will always be a need. There will always be a special bond amongst women in architecture, because of how we experience the built environment is different than how men experience it. And that's a really, really important factor. And so I hope that there'll be more women in leadership, there'll be more women in architecture, and that the built environment will be better because of us.
That would be an incredible growth to see in just 10 years. So hoping for that as well. Is there some sort of piece of advice that you would give to someone who is just starting their career, starting the profession, or just being introduced to AIA?
I think, depending on where I've been at in my career, I would probably give different advice. But right now, where I'm at, 22 years of experience, I would say, know your values and find a place that is in alignment with your own values, and also values you, not necessarily only as an architect, but values you as a person, values all of you, values you as the mom or the runner or the knitter or the potter or the, all these different things that we are, find a place that values you for who you are at your core. Easier said than done.
But an incredible culture to hope for. And it aligns with how you're talking about networking and connecting with people, finding that common ground. And sometimes those extra things that are outside the profession, but still identify who you are and how you live your life. That can be a way to find more resonance in a firm or in the way that you're practicing architecture, because there really are so many ways that different firms practice, whether it's collaboratively or whether it's the champion architect of a project and a more solo mindset. There's room for all these different strengths that people bring to the profession, and it's just going to grow the profession as a whole, so long as we can help each other find those places so that we can each grow and continue to grow the profession as a whole.
Yeah. Here, I'll end with this story. I was told very early in my career that I am too emotional to be an architect by a white male designer. I'm too emotional. And this was a common theme that came up for many years in my life. I'm emotional. It's true. I am. I'm not going to lie. But I listened to it was like a TED Talk, but it wasn't a TED Talk, but it was a 20-minute YouTube video by Carla Harris. And she talked about like finding out what people are saying about you. Like how do people describe you? And then if you don't like how they're describing you, for me, I didn't like being called emotional. They're like, find a way to change it. And so I flipped it on its head. And when people started calling me emotional, I would say, oh, you mean my passion? You're right. I'm super passionate about this. And, or I would even say, I'm so sorry. My passion is getting the better of me. And so, probably shouldn't apologize, but, or like, I'm very passionate about this. So I would talk about my passion a lot. And then I built this into a platform, and, I was able to use this platform of passion to win the AIA Young Architect Award and, a few different 40 under 40 awards. And I took this thing that I hated that people said about me, and I turned it into a really positive thing and like really amplified it. And so that would be my advice is to the youngest people is in the profession is find out through your mentor or your supervisor perceptions that are out there and address them head on.
That's hard. It's the hard call, but that's what makes it great advice, is that it's what you need to hear. It's not what you want to hear. It's a way to deal with hearing what you don't want to hear. And I really appreciate that. I haven't heard anyone tell me that. Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time. And this has been an incredible conversation about women in architecture and the start of the committee and so much more in the profession that has been happening since then. And we are only 10 years in. You are at the top of AIA, Minnesota at least.
One step at a time. Let's finish this year out.
Yeah. I think that's a good mantra. Let's finish this year out.
Yeah. Well,
right.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
This podcast interview is brought to you by members of the AIA Women in Architecture Committee in preparation for a networking session at the Minnesota 2024 AIA Conference on Architecture. We hope to see you at this fall conference. Otherwise, please check out the AIA Minnesota website. We have a calendar of upcoming events with women in architecture, or you can join our monthly meetings where we have engaging discussions. We connect with one another to support and celebrate the accomplishments of women in architecture.